Welcome back to Upside Down Data. New all-time highs are here again for Bitcoin. Let's break down what that means. So if you were watching the market today, you were rewarded with seeing a new Bitcoin all-time high. Currently stands at over $110,000. Currently, we're sitting above that as I record this on the 21st of May. So let's go ahead and break down what this means. So obviously the broader economic discourse has not been positive. Tariffs, risks of recession seem to be dominating the public sentiment, but here we are, Bitcoin at a new all-time high. And what I had talked about recently in my recent videos was that we were at a period of uncertainty, really, that things could go a multitude of different ways. Bitcoin could rally, Bitcoin could dump. It probably really just depended on the broader market and also just risk appetite. And I think one thing that is notable about what happened here with this breakout that Bitcoin's seeing is it actually happened with stocks not really anywhere close to their all-time highs. This is not Bitcoin riding the coattails of the broader stock market, for example, and then going up. It's instead Bitcoin doing its own thing. Now, is this a decoupling? Like, is the kind of fabled decoupling that people always like to talk about? Is Bitcoin finally breaking free? Go on some big monster rally while stocks are left in the dust? I think it's too early to say that. In fact, Bitcoin has actually often led the way relative to the stock market in some of these big major moves. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and overlay the S&P 500 here. And we just look at a few examples in history where, for example, in March 2020, you'll note that Bitcoin actually recovered sooner than the stock market. And then also likewise back here in 2018, Bitcoin actually collapsed before we had the big final move down in the stock market. So this does happen at times where Bitcoin, often being seen as the more risky asset or kind of further out on the risk curve, actually will sometimes make moves before the stock market. So that's another possibility here. We'll obviously know in a few weeks if that's the case, but it's certainly a possibility here of why Bitcoin's at new all-time highs while the stock market looks like it's trying to maybe even make a lower high. Is maybe this is just, we had a bad day in the stock market, but it'll be off to the races before too long, following the lead that Bitcoin is putting in. So I think we should kind of temper our expectations on that decoupling narrative, at least relative to the broader markets. But it is something to keep an eye on, in my opinion. And certainly no one's going to complain about a Bitcoin all-time high. This is a good thing no matter what, as long as you're holding Bitcoin, of course. So what I want to spend more time about is talking about Bitcoin, where this rally could potentially take us. Do we still have more momentum in the tank to take us higher? And then also I want to talk about what is Bitcoin doing relative to other crypto assets? Because I think that's maybe where the bigger decoupling narrative comes into focus. So to start off, I actually want to talk about a model that we have called the Trend Confidence Indicator, or TCI. And this will help us get at that idea of momentum. Is there still potentially gas in the tank for Bitcoin? So the way that you can look at this model is how is it trending relative to price? If you see the TCI start moving up aggressively, price will often follow. If you then see the TCI trending down aggressively, that tends to mark a slowing of momentum, some kind of a correction before you can resume the upside move. And what we can actually see is that throughout this entire kind of downward move that Bitcoin had, we did see this steady bullish divergence play out, where you actually saw the TCI start to slowly move up while price was moving down. And then we saw that really explosive move on the TCI really as we got to the beginning of that next leg up. And then it really shot up, suggesting that there was momentum. There was possible relative strength here that Bitcoin could then exploit. And so far it has. Now, what we want to be watching for is we've seen that the TCI has now slowed down as we've gotten up to this point. And if we see it fall off a cliff, really move down aggressively, that might be a marker that this rally is at least near its end, or the big impulse at least is near its end. So no definitive evidence of that yet, but what you'd really like to see is this shoot up more aggressively here. So we'll see if that happens, but if you see it move down aggressively, that would be a concern, suggesting at least this part of a move up might need to consolidate before further upside. Something that I'll be keeping an eye on. Another model that I like to keep an eye on is our short-term upside downside potential indicator. This is one of our risk models that we have here at the channel and on our website, polaritydigital.io. Link to that in the description. So basically, higher values mean higher risk, lower values mean lower risk, and this model cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, shorter in its time horizon. And you'll see the level that we got to here is actually similar to levels that we've had local tops at before. Kind of these local periods where cooling off then has to happen before further upside. And so it would not shock me at all if around this general region that we're at, we hit that kind of level. Now, we don't have to, right? We could, if we continue to rally, the next level I'd really be watching is up closer to the 2-ish level, where that tends to act as a resistance level in the past very often. Certainly recently it has on some of these big, more major moves that have taken us to all-time highs in the past. So it's something to keep an eye on. But if we see this kind of continue, risk cool off a bit, Bitcoin kind of starts slowing down, not really do a whole lot after this breakout to new all-time highs, that would suggest to me that we're actually probably in for a correction rather than some explosive breakout higher. So those are some things I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Now, the final Bitcoin related model that I wanted to talk about is our DXY based fair value model for Bitcoin. So this basically is plotting what is the fair value of Bitcoin based on what the DXY is doing. And the DXY is basically the strength of the dollar relative to a basket of other fiat currencies. And historically speaking, when the DXY does well, Bitcoin tends to do poorly. When the DXY does poorly, Bitcoin tends to do well. And recently, the dollar has not been doing well. It broke below support here and potentially has further to fall. And if that happens, you might expect fair value to remain in an optimistic place. And right now, it's in a great spot where Bitcoin, even at all-time highs, is below where the model sees its fair value as being based on what the dollar has been doing. And so that's hopeful, right? And actually it suggests that there could still be more upside for Bitcoin just to hit fair value, which is currently at just above 123K. No guarantees we get there in a straight line. And also if the dollar starts to rally for whatever reason, then you could see fair value come back down and then you kind of have fair value and price meet that way. But certainly still being below fair value is a much better place to be. And it's actually a unique occurrence so far this cycle based on what we've seen in the past. Every time Bitcoin's gotten to a new all-time high previously, it's done so by getting above fair value. This time we're at a new all-time high and we're still below fair value. That suggests that we're maybe in a healthier market spot where maybe the market actually can support higher Bitcoin prices from here versus what happened in the prior moves to all-time highs when we then had pretty notable corrections that followed. So a model I'll be watching closely, but so far so good. Certainly it is a point in the bull's favor to still be below fair value. So what this means for Bitcoin going forward is I think there is hope, but again, I'm not going to be a rah, throw your money into Bitcoin right now kind of guy, because that seems crazy to do when Bitcoin is at 110K. I was the rah, buy Bitcoin guy back here when we saw Bitcoin being massively undervalued and very low risk in a lot of our indicators, suggesting this is a very good time to be acquiring Bitcoin back through here. Now it's more about how many more percent do you want to try to eke out of the market? Do you want to hold on, try to get a little bit more, Totally fine, totally up to you. Or do you want to, maybe take a little bit more of a measured approach? And that's why I've been really talking about how in this moment of uncertainty we had, especially in macroeconomic uncertainty, there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking some chips off the table. But then if you're still exposed to the market, you're only happy when Bitcoin goes to new all-time highs. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I personally do not subscribe to a black and white view of the market or trading. I do not think that it makes sense to have to be all in or all out of the market at every single given point in time. I think it's a totally reasonable approach to say at a given point in time that I'm not totally confident where the market's going. Therefore, I'm going to hedge myself accordingly, and I'll benefit if things go well, but I won't suffer nearly so much if things go poorly. So that's one of the ways of thinking about this. And so again, if you're buying Bitcoin back over here, then you're not really worried too much if you're taking profits up here. You're still sitting in a very good spot. So that's just something I do like to reiterate, because every time you see Bitcoin breaking out new all-time highs, see all these people show up in social media basically shaming anyone who sold, saying they were idiots. You should have just held. Bitcoin's at new all-time high. I personally don't think that makes sense. I think there are other universes where very easily Bitcoin did not get to new all-time highs here, but then the discourse on social media would have been very different. Okay, so the final thing I want to touch on then in this video is what the heck is going on with other crypto assets. Bitcoin sitting at all-time highs, Then you have something like the likes of Ethereum, which had been a very strong performer in previous cycles, had really benefited. Whenever Bitcoin went on big runs, Ethereum would then follow. It was kind of seen as the silver to the gold in some ways, or kind of, you know, the Robin to the Batman, whatever analogy you want to use. It was kind of right there. That Bitcoin was the store of value. It was the digital gold. Ethereum was really that kind of more of the tech company within crypto. And these things, two things together in a portfolio would be very strong performing. Well, that hasn't really happened so much this cycle. It has not worked out so well. In fact, on our long-term upside downside potential indicator, what I'm showing you here, we actually saw Ethereum get all the way down to -5 in this correction, which is the bottom of the scale. That is a point that Ethereum has only rarely hit in the past, really extreme low values before. And that really just shows the contrast with Bitcoin, which Bitcoin hasn't gotten anywhere near the bottom of the scale on risk ever since it began its bull run in late 2022. And so when we're talking about decoupling, we talked about that at the beginning of the video. You know, are we decoupling from the stock market with Bitcoin? I think maybe the important question to ask here is, are we seeing a decoupling of Bitcoin from crypto more broadly, from Ethereum, from other altcoins? Because certainly we have other altcoins that have performed well so far this cycle, but even ones like Solana here, which has done very well this cycle, still has not broken out to decisive new all-time highs relative to the last cycle, and is struggling right now, still well below all-time highs. And you just kind of go down the list, altcoins are not really in a position right now that's looking anything like them being close to all-time highs. And yet here we are with Bitcoin. And I do think this is important to consider, because one of the things that altcoins really had going for them back here in 2021 was that the public perception of altcoins was very different. In the 2017 run and then collapse, it was a much smaller group of retail who ever got involved in crypto. Some did, but a lot of people didn't even know what crypto was back here. They had no concept of it, or if they heard about it, it was in passing, not something they ever really looked into or got interested in. And then it faded away as prices went down. They didn't think about it. And then 2021 rolled around. You know, we had the stimulus coming out of the crash here. We had people sitting at home, you know, in quarantine or in lockdown. And they all dumped into the market. And this was not just crypto. This was stocks. Everything exploded. And then you had all those narratives that could flourish there, where they didn't have nearly as many people who were burned by the last bear market sitting around. And they were just, you know, optimistic. There were all these narratives, how this is going to change the world, so on and so forth. They could just buy in and happily, you know, continue to buy all the way up, thinking that's just going to go in infinity. It's the future of finance, all that kind of stuff. What I think happened in the subsequent bear market and kind of crab price action that we've seen, and frankly, just abysmal price action from some altcoins, just using AVAX here as an example, I think a lot of people got burned. A lot of people thought, you know, I was buying this stuff thinking it was going to be the future, and now I'm down 90%. What is this? And then it's going to be a lot harder to get them to come back in. Then you add to that the meme coin cycle that we underwent, the scams, the ridiculous statistics, how it's less than 1% of people who actually made profit trading meme coins. That is going to turn off a lot of people. And so that's just one of the things that I think is a big headwind for altcoins right now. We're still in this space with crypto, unfortunately, where there are not a lot of killer apps that are being created, or things that people can see adding value beyond just speculation of something that might come in the future. And given that, it kind of makes sense why people would maybe be more skeptical, not want to just jump right back in, get on the hype cycle, because they've been through that before. They saw how that turned out last time. Where's the actual product? Where's the actual thing that I can tangibly see that's going to change the world? Whereas if you're Bitcoin, you're not trying to do that. You are what you say you are. You are that store of value. You are the network. That is what you're supposed to be, and that's all you're trying to be. It's a much easier thing to swallow, and not just for retail, but also especially for the institutional investors, where I think that's where a lot of interest, and probably frankly a big part of what's driving us new all-time highs, is coming from. Now, that's obviously less exciting if that ends up being kind of what's going on here from a retail perspective, because where you made the bulk of your gains in bull markets in the past was not in Bitcoin, but it was cycling out into these altcoins that have massive explosive moves. And so the question is that even possible now? And especially when we're at a place where interest rates are high, inflation was high, households might be feeling more hardship or not having as much disposable income to throw around. Can that happen this next time around? So I'll never say never, right? It's crypto. Things can go crazy. It can be these sentiment points where here I am talking about this that marks that kind of sentiment bottom, and then altcoins go crazy. I'm not going to rule that out. And again, it's all about probabilities. But for me personally, I actually think my base case has remained, and this is really what I said actually going into this cycle, that for altcoins, I felt that this needed to be the cycle where altcoins showed actual tangible value. It couldn't just be hype and speculation anymore. There had to be something that comes out of all this that you can just point to and say, that is a clear value add of crypto that we can't get from anywhere else. And this is going to be something that everyone will want, and it will then lead to meaningful increases coming from actual value being delivered. Whereas right now, a lot of it still is narratives and hype. A lot of people will argue. I know it might upset some people who think their altcoin is the exception. That's fine. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But in the broad aggregate, I don't think we've seen that kind of breakout yet. And that's where I think Bitcoin very well could continue to decouple. And unlike past cycles where every single time Bitcoin breaks out to new all-time highs, we might not be seeing altcoins then go break out to new all-time highs. Now, does that to say that I don't think there's going to be rallies in altcoins after Bitcoin finishes this move? No, I think that certainly is probably likely. That rotation happens within crypto. But is it the kind of thing that can bring us to all-time highs? That I think is very much yet to be seen. And I think we might need to see a different tenor of the market than what we're seeing right now. Because it is a perfectly possible interpretation here that Bitcoin's being seen somewhat like a store of value, which means it's looking like something like gold. And we've already seen gold going on an absolute tear, really ripping up in a parabolic fashion. And so this might just be, in some ways, Bitcoin realigning itself and starting to behave differently from the broader crypto space, which might be more of that really high risk kind of tech stock treated type of space where it might not be able to do so well in this environment. So things to think on. Obviously, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinions, but I think it's hard looking at just how the market's developing, looking at the data to say that this is the exact same that we've seen in prior cycles. I think so far we are seeing a decoupling, just not from the stock market for Bitcoin, but actually from the broader crypto space. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. I'll have updates from our models more over there. And go to our website, partydigital.io, to see live data from our models and more.